What if a society could eliminate pain, suffering, and even the burden of choice? Lois Lowry's compelling 1993 novel The Giver may have been written over 3 decades ago, but its themes are more relevant than ever, echoing our modern concerns about the loss of individuality in an increasingly monitored and technology-centered world. While we grapple with issues around data privacy and emotional desensitization, The Giver foresaw the dangers of sacrificing personal freedom and authentic human connection for the illusion of perfection. Through the journey of Jonas, our protagonist, we'll uncover the psychological impact of a life devoid of choice and authentic connection, revealing the inherent human need for love, pain, and the freedom to make our own mistakes. Let's take a closer look at The Giver, a story that forces us to question the very fabric of our society and the price we pay for safety and predictability. How to create a utopia. A utopia is an imagined place or society that is designed to be perfect or ideal, where everything functions harmoniously and all its members live in peace. In a utopia, social, political, and economic systems are built to eliminate suffering, inequality, and injustice. In this environment, the well-being of every individual is prioritized. The idea represents the highest aspirations of what humans could achieve, free from all the flaws and challenges of the real world. Utopian ideals are a frequent topic of exploration across literature, philosophy, and social theory, whether from the lens of inspiration or critique of modern society. Stories like The Hunger Games and 1984 are outright dystopias, societies characterized by suffering, oppression, and an authoritarian government. The people have been beaten down. There is no hope for a better future. The environment is decayed and polluted, and everyone accepts the futility of trying to fight the system. Lowry subverts this sort of overt helplessness by painting a society that seems happy and harmonious. From Jonas's perspective, we're made to think the citizens are grateful for such an orderly and practical way of life, glad that all of their problems are taken care of for them. Underneath the surface, though, all the elements of a dystopian society are still there. The only difference is the citizens do not recognize them as such. Jonas's society is still under authoritarian control. The propagandistic ceremonies, surveillance, and censorship are all tools authoritarians use to enforce conformity. Every dwelling has an intercom that cannot be turned off, where commands are issued that must be obeyed. Jonas is aware that he's being watched at all times by someone with the power to publicly shame him if he steps out of line. People are treated as cogs in a machine, valuable only in terms of their ability to contribute to the community. Even death has been standardized based on arbitrary decisions of when a human's usefulness has been exhausted. This sleight of hand makes a poignant point about how bad things can be seen as good depending on what's considered acceptable or right in one's environment. Jonas's community could only function the way it does if some very important psychological processes have gone wrong. From birth, first we start to build our personalities by integrating aggressive impulses, which will gradually become our drive for goal-directed behavior. Next, we must integrate erotic impulses in the form of genital excitation into tenderness, dependency, and intimacy. This is how we learn to separate sexual love from emotional love. Normal personalities are defined by access to a wide range of complex, sometimes conflicting, but always well-modulated emotions. This results in a stable sense of self amidst a setting of predominantly positive affective experience. Challenging emotions integrate into tolerable, manageable forms. They're experienced as simply normal emotions, not polarizing, destabilizing extremes that would be disruptive to social relating and personality formation. When this doesn't happen, you see 2 types of personality dysfunction. The higher, more adaptive level is the neurotic personality organization. Neurotic personalities do have a consolidated identity, but fail to integrate sexuality with intimacy. This results in stable and ongoing conflicts around dependency and attachment rejection, self-criticism, and fear of disapproval. Neurotic personalities rely on repression as a defense mechanism. By keeping emotional conflict and highly charged effects out of conscious awareness, the ego is protected from threatening self-representations. Repression causes a rigid character structure. Anxiety activates obsessional, intellectualizing defenses habitually, automatically, and involuntarily. In comparison, the mature defensive functioning of the normal personality allows all aspects of an anxiety-provoking situation into subjective awareness. There would be little or no perceptual distortion. Mature defenses minimize psychological distress while optimizing coping. Something more extreme happens when archaic aggression doesn't get integrated into the personality structure. Firstly, there generally isn't any chance to normatively integrate sexual impulses, as aggression hasn't been mastered first. Primitive aggression is consonant to hate, as primitive sexuality is to love. At this level of personality organization, it's very difficult to foster meaningful relationships with others. Without integrating and transmuting to their modulated and differentiated forms, the personality forms under a predominance of negative affect where free-floating, highly charged aggressive impulses constantly threaten disintegration of the self. This requires the use of primitive, reality-distorting defenses that prevent the ego from synthesizing, which is necessary for identity formation. The superficial sense of peace and order is maintained in a way that mirrors what is known in psychology as splitting. One emotional tone is cleaved from its opposite, and they are not experienced simultaneously. We sometimes call this black and white or dichotomous thinking. Rather than integrate conflicting emotions together, as in a feeling like bittersweet, essentially a blend of good and bad, the individual's perception is distorted to view reality only through the lens of one or the other. Reality is understood to only be one thing, but not both. The complete suppression of negative emotions and memories requires distortions in perceptual processing, which cause disordered and unrealistic perspectives on life, oneself, and other people. Significantly, Lowry's Dystopia cleaves off the two emotions whose integration is most strongly associated with healthy personality development. Aggression has been removed from the community, and it is required at puberty to take a pill that neutralizes sexual impulses. The most severe forms of mental illness are the product of using extremely immature and primitive defense mechanisms that turn bad things good and avoid any and all conflict. Splitting is one of those defenses. Passive aggression looks compliant on the outside while really being hostile on the inside. Help rejecting complaining claims to want support while simultaneously refusing it. A good thing is secretly a bad thing. Only the bad thing is hidden and unseen underneath the good facade. While in Jonas's community there may be no need for shame, fear, pain, and sadness because severe conformity has eliminated interpersonal conflict, it comes at the expense of all the good parts of the self. Good is defined by bad, the same way light is defined by dark. Dystopias serve as cautionary tales of social extremes, but Lowry's false utopia takes it a step further in demonstrating how even a positive authoritarian environment would still ultimately result in a loss of self. Splitting results in a fragmented sense of identity and an inability to see or cope with the complex ambiguities of life. This is part of why Jonas can't imagine what role he's going to be assigned. The elders choose based on what they see on the outside, and Jonas can't guess because his actions aren't heavily based on what he feels inside. Identity development isn't based on occupation, but on sense of self. It has to be learned. The community's so reliant on social conformity, because without a strong sense of self, identification is made with how others respond to you, not who you actually are. The depths of the past. You can't know what you're missing without seeing the experiences of others and how they are different from your own. How would you know you are being deprived without seeing what others have? Before Jonas was exposed to the memories, he never questioned the reality he lived in. Asking questions is a means of challenging the status quo, but there's no reason to do so when life is worry and pain-free. Want is the inverse of deprivation, but differentiation is necessary to see the comparison. Jonas's community forfeited this when they went to, quote, sameness, eliminating all differences amongst individuals. Jonas has no identity because there are no differences between people, only differences between roles. Jonas has no reason to question whether he would want a different type of family than the one he has until he sees a memory of a multi-generational family structure. The elders, the grandparents, remain with the family unit, giving Jonas a sense of family that feels more complete than his own, and causing him to question where his own parents of the parents are. In the reality he knows, Family units are temporary configurations formed solely for functional purposes. Parents are assigned children. Once the children grow up and leave the household, the family dissolves. This one-generational perception of reality means that even family serves a utilitarian purpose, relationships based on the roles they fulfill, but without deep, lasting emotional bonds. There's no real relationship, no sense of attachment. Jonas never even realized one day his parents will cease to be a part of his life, because without a link to the past, there is only the now. Grandparents are a direct link to the past, providing the wisdom of experience to youth. There aren't even surnames. These roles have been taken over by the authoritarian elders, who somehow can be trusted to choose wisely for each individual, without the benefit of any historical background. There isn't any. The brain has what are called associative neural networks, which map neuronal connections that communicate via links between stimuli, thoughts, and memories. Parts become chunks, related pieces of information from different regions of the brain, linked together pulling from various cognitive functions related to memory, learning, and perception. What wires together fires together. Learned associations are encoded as pattern recognition and get stored in distribution networks rather than isolated cells. These patterns strengthen due to their simultaneous activation and memory retrieval, solidifying the associative links. By removing multi-generational connections and reducing families to functional units, Lowry dehumanizes relationships. Lacking associative links, the current state of being is not connected to anything that previously influenced it. This also helps to explain why Jonas has no sense of personal identity. Generally speaking, who we are begins based in who our family is. All sense of identity in every family in Jonas's world has been wiped of any meaningful background. This form of dehumanization means the members of Jonas's community rarely even bother to look in mirrors, because there is no point to recognizing one's individuality, even when it comes to how you look. It's considered rude to notice the differences from person to person, even to congratulate someone for doing well, lest that cause a sense of separateness from the group. Even good differences cannot be recognized, sacrificing the good and contributing to an overall sense that individuality itself is bad. Without conflict, there can be no losers, but there can be no winners either. There is no concept of special. You can't really change what something will become without knowing how it came to be. Current reality simply is. It will not grow or evolve because there's no context, nothing to learn from, and nothing to strive toward. An unchanging perpetual now is yet another type of reality that could only happen with abnormal personality functioning. The interesting thing is, this actually translates to a very specific area in terms of personality development and again, speaks directly to differences between neurotic, higher-level personality development and what happens that causes people to remain stuck at a more immature, narcissistic level of personality development. Normal development of the ego undergoes a phase of separation and individuation, where the child starts to alternate between dependence and independence, differentiating a unique sense of self from that of the caregiver. Babies don't even have color vision until around 5 months. For a long time we're looking at others and have no sense of who we are externally yet, a direct parallel to why Jonas feels it doesn't matter much what he looks like. The fact that his pale eyes mark him out as different causes him to perceive himself as he is perceived by others, which makes him uncomfortable. We have internal representations of others before we have one for ourselves. Reflective self-awareness, being able to recognize ourselves in a mirror, doesn't happen until around 1.5 years. And it's a psychological adjustment to realize we exist in two realities. The internal one no one can see, and the external one that we can't see but others can. There has to be coherence between both self-representations, which isn't going to happen if there's no awareness of one side or the other. So, initially our understanding of self is based on our understanding of the caregiver, and we only gradually begin to tease out how we differ once we start exercising more free will based on wants and needs that differ from those of the caregiver. Initially, our wants and needs are fused to what the caregiver allows or prefers because of the total dependency of the infant. Learning to separate from the caregiver's will moves us out of that psychological state of sameness into same but different. We still want to meet mutually gratifying goals which continues to ensure attachment, but have our own to pursue that may conflict with the caregiver. This is why the terrible twos can be so challenging, because as we are gaining mobility in language, the relationship between parent and child can become a battle of wills, and both parties, not just the child, have to learn how to stay in sync through conflicting goals. The child adapts to the parent's will because he has no choice, but not every parent is willing to let the child exercise their own will and challenge the caregivers. The child knows what will please the parent and feels safer to remain in this state of sameness, because to exercise autonomy may cause him to be emotionally rejected. If the caregiver suppresses behavior that doesn't conform to expectations or struggles to let the child separate, the child will learn that his natural expressions must be inhibited, and his options of how to be are those that the caregiver allows. His sense of self is based on doing what others want him to do, not what he wants to do. This will ensure a narcissistic form of relating because the child has to continue to mirror the parent and can't deviate from what he's supposed to reflect back. The developmental role of the child is to understand how to adapt to the caregiver's expectations, but this then has to be reinforced by the caregiver, encouraging the child's individuality. Remaining in the state of sameness means the parent views the child as an extension of themselves and experiences a sense of incoherence if the child deviates. Conversely, the child will experience a state of incoherence if he were to act on his authentic inclinations rather than conform to expectations. He is coherent by being what others want him to be, not by being himself. People-pleasing is a common example of remaining in the state of sameness, where people fear they will be rejected if they challenge or contradict the other person, and that attachment will be damaged by differences of opinion and needs. Narcissistic relating doesn't differentiate and move into the next stage until individual differences are allowed and accepted, and multiple perspectives and needs can coexist within the attachment relationship. Genuine emotional connection requires the ability to appreciate the internal experience of the self and others, to know one's own mind and how it differs from another's mind. Remaining in sameness means truncating development to a phase where others can only be understood when they think and feel the same as you and require no additional effort to be understood. Sameness keeps people stuck at a developmentally immature expectation of perfect empathic attunement, where it simply isn't learned that needs have to be verbally communicated, and agency is necessary to find common ground. Development of the self is lost because it doesn't get expressed. Once Jonas begins experiencing emotional depth, he's able to more accurately understand the emotions of those around him. What Lily believed to be anger was nothing more than shallow exasperation and frustration. Mother's concern for the grave consequences of the rule breaker are superficial compared to the rage of rankling injustice that cannot be easily assuaged with soothing language over the dinner table. When a person has numb or shallow emotions, they are still real, but lack any depth. The meaning is in the comparison, in the understanding of each individual's subjective perception. For his sister's petty frustrations, without being exposed to other emotional experiences, she will never have any way of knowing they exist, and will be doomed to believe the way her emotions work are how emotions are supposed to work. She will believe it's normal because she doesn't know any other way, and those around her confirm it with their sameness. Lowry contrasts Jonas's new emotional depths with the disconnected, contextless reality those around him live in. Once he begins to experience depths that those around him can't relate to, he begins to feel isolated, knowing he can't communicate his perspective to others because they will not be able to feel its resonance. They can't feel what he feels. Jonas can now see how his perception differs from others, but it's only once he becomes separate from the group that he is able to do so. Identity requires differentiation. One must first have an individual sense of self that is separate and differentiated before recognizing what is lost to conformity. An undifferentiated sense of self remains dependent on the system for definition. A lack of deep emotional bonds makes it unlikely that love, or any other emotion, would threaten the systems in place. Those who lack awareness of the richness and complexity of relationships based on authenticity and personal identity, who do not conform to relationships based on societal rules and expectations, live a shallow and disconnected existence which ultimately dehumanizes the group they strive to conform to into meaningless, interchangeable objects. Those who truly understand the meaning of connection value individuality. Seeing beyond, defining reality. Should you believe what you see, or hear, or feel? How would you describe sights, sounds, and colors to someone without the sensory perception to experience them? If something is felt but not seen, is it any less true or real? Can words convey something that the senses can't? Jonas is chosen for his special role because he has the ability to do something the others can only name but not describe, the capacity to see beyond. He can recognize an additional aspect of objects that others can't perceive, the dimension of color. He initially has no words to describe the concept, how the object changed. The dimensions of size and shape stayed the same. In this dystopian future, the ability to perceive the perceptual layer of color has been eliminated. Jonas literally lives in a world without color. What we perceive dictates what we understand. Some things can only be felt and not articulated. Something perfectly explained won't be fully understood by someone who can't feel it. By altering someone's perception and the language that describes it, we can alter reality. In order to know what something is, the label and its meaning must be accurately perceived. We first perceive information from our senses before we're able to process it in the mind. The resultant language defines reality, and to manipulate language is to manipulate reality. If perception is distorted, reality is distorted. Jonas's community uses language as a tool not just for communication, but as a means of maintaining control and enforcing order, something famously explored in 1984 and other dystopian fiction. The authoritarian power in 1984 uses newspeak, a form of language that is intentionally simplistic and restricted. Mottos like war is peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength use paradoxical language to distort and invert what words mean, inverting the experience being described. Words that express dissent, rebellion, and freedom are eliminated. By limiting the range of expressible ideas to describe reality, a society can limit the ability of individuals to question, resist, or even understand the full extent of their oppression. The citizens cannot articulate and therefore imagine any reality beyond the one which their neutered language can describe. This ensures compliance and complacency. When words limit emotional and intellectual depth, they leave no way to conceptualize deeper understanding. Jonas's community eliminates language with connotations that could lead to emotional intensity or conflict. The difference between a dwelling and a home is in the personal connection one feels to their private space. The community's insistence on precision of language results in words that are more specific but fail to convey the depth of meaning. This is because language exists on two levels, higher and lower orders. The primary, concrete meaning, and the higher unseen, abstract meaning. Lower orders of language are basic, foundational skills that we learn early in life to grasp direct and explicit meanings. A person must progress to higher abstractions of language in order to make use of things like metaphors, irony, idioms, and symbolism. Abstract language involves concepts that are not concrete or directly observable and conveys meaning beyond literal interpretation. Stripping language of its higher orders of meaning is another way the community flattens perception of reality. To conceive of a different way of being and doing requires hypothetical, not concrete thought, imagining a version of reality that is not real. Limiting reality to the concrete keeps the citizens at a more simplistic, immature level of cognitive processing. Concrete thinkers struggle with figurative language and tend to interpret things at face value, resulting in difficulty with social cues, context, implied, and nonverbal meaning. Understanding higher and lower orders of language gives you the ability to understand higher and lower planes of reality. Jonas is startled to learn that his training instructions grant him the power to lie, creating a deceptive version of reality uncoupled from the concrete. Realizing that other adults may have been freed from constrictions that allow them to present a different version of the truth from the one everyone conforms to means that reality could have many different subjective interpretations. What's real can be changed with only words. Deception is another way we use words to alter reality, but so is asking questions and exploring others' perspectives. Jonas is also granted the ability to ask anyone, anything, and to expect answers. and also learns that there are many more books than the handful the citizens are allowed. What's real depends on perspective. Lowry depicts an enormous truth about perception and language in the way the giver transmits memories to Jonas. He asks Jonas to perceive the names for feelings and objects he has no words for, and often, Jonas does. When the giver gives Jonas a memory of a multi-generational family at Christmas, Jonas can perceive the warmth and depth of the feeling, but he can't get the word for it. He can feel its content, but he can't identify the emotion. Emotional content of concrete reality exists on a separate plane of understanding, on two separate dimensions of experience, and the community has removed one. Without sensory input to define words, their meaning is one-dimensional. This results in a community of empty cognitive empathy without true affective empathy, an intellectual understanding of what isn't being experienced. Even the concept of death is divested of its meaning, described as release. Death is made palatable without the connotation of its finality. When the giver believes that giving Rosemary emotional pain is less harmful than giving her physical pain, he fatally misunderstands their orders of magnitude. On what level the concept of pain is higher or lower, the physical or mental? Differing perspectives interpret concrete and sensory reality differently. Symbolic meaning is the only universal truth. Words themselves are symbols. They represent things but are not actual things. When the words for death lack their symbolic meaning, humans are blocked from processing loss. In Splitting, Processing Loss, and Borderline States, Gerard Bale describes the generational transmission of a narcissistic deficiency that results when parents pass on their inability to work through pain. He writes, "What is handed down to the children of those who, finding it impossible to accomplish the work of mourning, isolate a living dead object, and banish from their vocabulary and their behavior anything that might evoke the split-off part of themselves? Silence is imposed upon them. The children must not ask certain questions. They have to adopt perspectives similar to those of their parents. The important element here is that, contrary to what happened with the parents, these counter-cathexes will not come into conflict with any kind of content. There are, of course, crypts, but these are empty, at least at first. Later, they will fill them up. What is passed on is the isolation, the fortress of narcissistic counter-cathexes. The barriers are passed on without any indication being given of what they are meant to stand in the way of. That would seem to have something meaningless about it, having no significance as it were, and hence a deficiency as regards the symbolic organization of the ego. What is not passed on is not something unconscious that has been struck out by repression, nor is it something that has to be kept secret. It is something that is purely and simply missing, in an absolute sense. This will turn out to be a narcissistic deficiency. It will not be seen as such while the person's immediate circle of family and friends plug the gap by means of false answers to any questions that might be asked. Typical schemata of preordained destinies, the mental equivalent of ready-made, prearranged thoughts, hyper-focus of knowledge and learning will all come along to fill up deceptively the gaping hole of the narcissistic void, paving the way for a conventional attitude towards life, creating people for whom only appearances count, with no preconscious symbolic depth to them. Suppressing emotional language causes glaring distortions in conceptual meaning. Words like love can only be defined by felt emotional expression, and are considered obsolete in Jonas's world, because these emotions are not felt. Stirrings does not capture the feeling of sexual attraction. There is no touching outside of family units, making that sensate processing largely impoverished. Words that depict emotional states are replaced with sterile and clinical terms that reflect the shallowness of the community members' interior worlds. Knowing what something is not the same as knowing how something feels. The multidimensional perceptual processing of the human mind means that all of our senses must integrate together in order to accurately perceive reality. True psychological health comes not from avoiding pain, but learning to tolerate and integrate the full range of emotional experience. Emotional connection can be intense and overwhelming. The giver lived alone, isolated from his peers, who had no way of understanding the emotional world he lived in. This is the reality for many who want to live an emotionally vibrant and authentic life. Jonas and the giver were used as containers for the pain and depth of feeling that those around them had no capacity to endure. Jonas soon too found that as he began to grow and mature, he drifted away from those who couldn't understand. Too much emotional connection can be overwhelming. But what is a connection without its depths? Love is a fusion of the internal selves by something that is only felt and is by definition irrational. Love is not sane. It requires something you cannot see. What humans are capable of if allowed to feel defies all reason. There's no depth deeper than love or more beautiful than love, which inevitably means there is no pain more annihilating and powerfully destructive than love. We are not whole if we cannot experience both. Human life is devalued when individuality and emotions are suppressed. External conformity blocks the maturity of personhood, and to run away from maturation is to run away from reality. The loss of innocence as we grow and change creates a finality that cannot be undone or returned to. Loss of the possible, from who we could be into who we are, means to survive with everything it means to be human. In our quest for harmony, we must not lose sight of what it fundamentally means to be. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in and taking the time to explore this classic work from a more developmental-based lens. What you just heard today primarily comes from object relations theory and the works of British psychoanalysts like Otto Kernberg, Melanie Klein, and D.W. Winnicott. Here at Dr. The Psychology, we practice from an approach known as psychodynamic, which deals with a lot of conceptual theory and traditional Freudian psychoanalysis. I'm Dan with Dr. The Psychology, and this is only the first of many dissections of popular fiction broken down to its psychological parts. We're going to be looking at a broad range of content and exploring its themes, from the most popular TV shows, books, and movies, to some new stuff you probably never heard of that we're really excited to get to share. This is still early days, but we have big plans for this channel, and can't wait to branch out into YouTube content, maybe some short form or TikTok reels. We're going to be looking at getting that Patreon up and running and some cool subscriber features. The possibilities are as endless as the mind. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, share it with your friends. Take care, and we'll see you next time.